Excuse me. Yep, the 6th of November. It's the day after Bonfire Night, and we now know that Donald Trump is the next President of the United States. And of course, there is no end of media conjecture about what this means for Americans, what it means for the global security situation, what it will mean for international trade, how America will relate to Europe, whether the Ukrainian war will be stopped by Trump as he's promised, and so on and so forth. Now, let me just set my own stall out straight away about my opinion of Mr. Trump. As a human being, I find him detestable. He's probably one of the most unpleasant, misogynistic and racist people I can imagine becoming the President of the United States. And it's a mystery to me as to why so many black and non-white Americans voted for Mr. Trump. But having said that, and knowing Mr. Trump's previous performance as the president from 2016 onwards, the very unpredictability of the man actually, in some ways, changes the whole global situation far more radically than you might imagine, because although we assume that he's going to do certain things and he's promised to do certain things, what Mr. Trump has that's useful to us in terms of the geopolitical situation and politics and security and ending wars and so on is actually remarkably interesting. And the fact that the American population has voted surprisingly overwhelmingly for Mr. Trump is an indication of one key feature of democracy which everybody forgets about, and that is once people are allowed the chance to choose things, they often choose the things that the establishment doesn't want, and that international globalized corporations also don't want, because people don't vote because of businesses, they don't vote because of even policies, they vote because somebody represents something which they believe. Now, the Americans have voted for Mr. Trump. Mostly, I have to say, I think his following comes from the working classes of America, who have been marginalized for decades by middle-class centrist politics, including the Republicans and the Democrats over many, many decades, where nothing ever really changes. And what these people have actually voted for is for things to change. And although Mr. Trump is a horrible individual, he represents, to them at least, that power of change. Now, what's interesting about this from the Scottish perspective is how the American population has managed to completely upset the political system in the US and to dislodge the conservative centre of American politics. And we have the same thing here. We have centrist politicians both in Westminster and now in Hollywood as well, in the form of Mr. Swinney's administration. All of these are designed to keep everything as it is, stable. And this is something which businesses like. They don't like unpredictability, particularly in politics, and especially not in international commerce. However, there's some opportunities as well as threats here. Trump has said that he wants to be a peacemaker, and although he changes his mind almost as often as he opens his mouth, Mr. Trump never seems to have a script. He walks on stage and just says the first thing that pops into his head that he thinks people want to know. He has made two key pledges. One is to shut off the illegal migration through America's southern border, something which is going to cause mayhem in South America and the South American states from where many of the migrants have been originating. But not only that, but the second part of this building back up the economy, providing better jobs, lower inflation and so on. But the second part of his pledge to be the peacemaker is probably the more interesting one, because there's an opportunity here, if Trump is true to his word, and he has these wonderful relationships with people like Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Kim Jong-un, just to name three major dictators, if he does have this transactional relationship with these people and he can persuade people like Vladimir Putin and perhaps Volodymyr Zelensky to stop fighting, there is a chance, and it is only a chance, that it might take the form that the First World War's conclusion took, which is an armistice. In other words, a goalless draw where both sides have fought their way to a standstill and no further progress is possible. But in the event that America intervenes, or Trump intervenes through the UN and says, right, Vladimir and Volodymyr, we want this war over, and there will be an armistice, and the UN will broker it, and perhaps Ukraine remains independent as a neutral state, a buffer zone, if you like, between West and East, satisfying Putin's demands, but also guaranteeing the continuing existence of Ukraine. That might actually work, because nobody wants this war to continue. Trump isn't obviously the kind of guy who is talented enough to make that happen by himself, but he does have both military and diplomatic advisors who could make something like this begin to happen. So there is that opportunity. However slim the chance of it might seem at the moment, it is now a possibility, whereas yesterday it just wasn't. Kamala Harris was planning to keep supplying Ukraine with weapons to stave off the Russian advance. The Russians would have kept on fighting indefinitely until they basically ran out of people or overwhelmed Ukraine. Either way, that is a horrible way for a war to end. Ukraine eventually being overrun, the Russians perhaps losing over 1 million of their young men and women in the process, and Ukraine perhaps losing as many or more. So the whole thing in Ukraine, if it's ended in that way, could, I'm just saying could, be a good thing. Now, the other thing that Trump claims to be able to do is to talk to China, to do deals with China. And if he succeeds in doing that, and the entire global economic center of gravity shifts towards a more, shall we say, cooperative domination of the global order by both America and China working together, that would be a really worrying sign in a way. Although it would diffuse the initial confrontation between the United States and the People's Republic of China, it would also mean that the entire rest of the world would largely be buying things in dollar yen or dollar yuan, be some kind of hybrid hybrid currency in which international trade is done. But that would leave the entire European Union out in the cold and leave the United Kingdom rudderless and entirely at the beck and call of the United States, because the United Kingdom has basically drawn up its drawbridge and filled the moat when it comes to the European Union. The Tories and mostly English and Welsh voters decided to leave the European Union. Scotland didn't want to do it, as we all know. And that has left the UK isolated completely and without trade deals to 27 other countries, which has greatly damaged its economy. And it's now dependent much more heavily on what happens in America. And Donald Trump is known to loathe and despise the Labour Party, which is now running the UK. So that creates more problems for England. But what sort of opportunities does it give to small countries with large amounts of assets, commodities that are in hot demand across the globe? Well, it opens the door to other countries to begin to start protectionism, which is what Trump really stands for. He wants to close the doors on imports coming into the United States, rebuild its economy, and establish a much more favorable trading position as a closed state, if you like, one which will thrash out deals with other protectionist states. And if the world regresses back from its globalized openness in terms of trade back to a more closed protectionist system where every country does its own deals individually with everybody else rather than being part of, say, a big union like the EU, that creates opportunities for small countries like ours. So there are two things I would take away from what's happened this morning. One is that, as far as Scotland is concerned, it shows the power of democracy, of people changing the direction of a country, changing the entire nature of that country, and altering its relationship with the rest of the world. Now, we never think of ourselves as being capable of that, however, we are. And as I'm tired of saying over the last 10, 15 years, Scotland's constitutional situation has not changed in the last 317 years. We have a cast iron guarantee, a condition in the Treaty of Union which guarantees that Scottish sovereignty is maintained in perpetuity, and that means that everybody in Scotland is sovereign, and that means popular sovereignty is still the legal default in Scottish politics. Now, if that's so, then there's nothing to stop us in 2026 electing our own charismatic leader or leaders and our own government, which is a lot more protectionist when it comes to dealing with both England, America, the rest of the world, and asserts its ownership and control over its own resources. That would have to be done by defiance, but people power is strong, and we've seen this in the American election. There have enough people vote to upset the cosy apple cart of centrist politics in favour of a new paradigm, then it can be done. And it doesn't matter how small the country is, it just matters how many people turn out and vote for that change. And that is really the inspiration I would take from this scenario. Although I hate Donald Trump and I have despised the man for years, the fact is his very unpredictable, capricious nature actually works in our favour in a way, because it now destabilizes the old bastions of establishment control over everything, the wealthy controlling the fate of the country. And if that's the case, then we would need to dislodge the centrist politicians in our own parliament and replace them with far more radical and much more unpredictable and far more protectionist politicians here in Scotland who are prepared to say, that's enough. You've been ripping all our oil and gas off for years. We're taking back control of that. We're going to take back control over all of our energy resources. We are going to become independent. We're going to offer our people the opportunity to vote on that new future. And that's it. And do what you like, but that's what we're going to do. The interesting thing is that with Donald Trump's strange family connection to Scotland, he might actually respect a leader who does that here. And if he's as true to his word as he claims he is, and he builds personal relationships with such leaders, then there's no reason why he couldn't do that here and support Scotland's bid to recover its assets and to become a small, very wealthy, asset-rich country which is capable of trading by itself, and America should support that if Trump is to be believed. There's a lot of big ifs in this, but the point of the matter is that if we behave in the same way that the American voting population has done in 2026, we could turn the dial completely the opposite direction in terms of the centre of political power here in Scotland and change the direction of our future in a way which is a huge challenge to the rest of the United Kingdom, and would give us the leverage that we need to negotiate trade deals with England, with Wales, with Ireland, with the European Union, with America, China, and whoever else we wanted to, without having to go cap in hand to Westminster to ask permission to do any of these things. And there's no reason why we ever really needed to do that in the first place. So although I'm rather stunned by the developments in the United States, like so many other people, because the British media and American media, both of which are very conservative with a small c, very much vested in keeping things as they are, have been completely taken by surprise by this development this morning. And that's exactly the kind of upset we need to cause in 2026. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the current situation. I know these are not hard facts. These are my opinions and not everybody else's. But I see opportunities as well as threats in Mr. Trump's comeback. And let's face it, in the history of the United States, I'm not sure, but I think he's only the second president to run successfully and get a second term. I could be wrong, but I'm sure some of my American friends will correct me, but I'm pretty certain that this hasn't happened for well over 150 years in the US. So it's a sign that people ordinary working people in America are absolutely sick, fed up of conventional centrist politicians controlling everything that happens and ensuring that they are sidelined. People of Scotland are sovereign. That means every one of us has the power to change the future. And if we are as bold as our American brethren in changing our own future, then we can change it for the better. Anyway, that is my punt from the pulpit today. I hope you've enjoyed today's programme. As ever, if you would like to donate to Inde-Car and you enjoy these programmes, I will post a link as usual. And if you want to donate, you can, and I always appreciate such donations. It helps keep me broadcasting. In the meantime, as I always say, keep the faith. But remember, faith doesn't need to be blind faith. And we're not keeping faith in politicians here. I'm asking you to keep faith with yourself and your neighbours and your family and your friends. And remember, it's you who is the sovereign here. It's you that will control the outcome of the next general election in Scotland in 2026. And it would be fantastic if we created the kind of upset that Trump has created in America right here in Edinburgh and boot out all of these centrist, comfortable politicians and their conservative with a small c continuation politics, and switch it for something much more substantial, much more robust, much more combative, and also far more assertive than anything we have ever seen since Holyrood reopened in 1997. Anyway, that's it from me today. As I say, keep the faith, but remember, keep faith in yourselves, and I'll see you next time on Inde-Car. Bye for now.